Well, good afternoon. My name is Guy Loftman. I am chair of the Community Collaboration Committee of the Monroe County branch of the NAACP. On behalf of our branch and on behalf of the Indiana University Black Law Students Association, I welcome you here to our discussion about critical race theory, sometimes referred to as CRT. We are honored to have town folks and gown folks and out-of-town folks join us today. Thank you for being with us. And I want a special shout out to members of the Jefferson Clark County branch of the NAACP and their president, Anta Fields. Would you all please raise a hand if you made it up here from Jeffersonville? I'd want to recognize the community sponsors that have made this a true community collaboration. Those are Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Inc., the Kappa Tau Omega chapter, the Brown County League of Women Voters, Indiana University Civic Leaders Center, Indiana University NAACP, the Indiana University Neil Marshall Black Culture Center, the Jefferson Clark County Indiana NAACP, the Martin Luther King Jr. Commission of the City of Bloomington, Monroe County Democratic Party, Monroe County Democratic Women's Caucus, the League of Women Voters of Bloomington-Monroe County, Monroe County National Organization for Women, NOW, the St. Mark's United Methodist Church, St. Thomas Lutheran Church, Trinity Episcopal Church, and the Racial Justice Task Force of the Unitarian Universalist Church. If any of you are here with any of those, raise a hand and we'll say thank you. Here is today's agenda. We'll start with a panel which will discuss critical race theory from various perspectives. After the panelists have each spoken, they'll talk amongst themselves about the ideas that they've heard from each other. And then we're going to have an open public discussion. We have 2 microphones, and 2 people will be carrying them around, and they will be going up and down the aisles. So if you have a question or a comment, we'll have a 2-minute limit for anything you want to say that is appropriate, and we're looking forward to hearing everybody's thoughts who wants to speak. Following the public discussion, the panelists will have a few minutes to express their final thoughts on the subject. And let me introduce the panelists. We published that Nashuba Hudson, president of the IU Black Law Students Association, would be on the panel. However, she was not able to, but she is here with us, and we appreciate all the work she's done. Nashuba, there she is. Thank you so much. But in her place, I'm very excited that we are able to substitute IU professor Yvette Butler. Dr. Butler teaches constitutional law, critical race theory, and theories of collective liberation at the IU Maurer School of Law. Last year, I find this quite touching. Last year, she was teaching critical race theory seminar at the University of Mississippi Law School. She's new here to Bloomington. And the Mississippi legislature passed a law that prohibited teaching any class that forced students to agree that any sex, race, ethnicity, religion, or national origin is inherently superior or inferior. Well, I think that sounds like a great class. Everybody should be taught nobody's better than everybody else. But they herald this as banning critical race theory, although they never defined the term. Dr. Butler took this as a learning opportunity and ended up talking to the legislature and all sorts of people around the state. And the bill's sponsors finally said, well, her class on critical race theory wasn't what they were really talking about. So, Professor Butler will be followed by Rashad Nelms. Raise a hand, Rashad. Thank you. Doctor of Jurisprudence. Rashad is Indiana University's Associate Vice President for Strategy and Innovation within the Office of Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and is Indiana University Bloomington's Associate Vice Provost for Diversity and Inclusion. Rashad has nearly 20 years of international experience working with the United Nations World Food Program in more than 27 countries. He has a broad perspective to bring to issues of race. And yes, his parents are Charlie and Jeanette Nelms. Some of us are surely curious about that. And our last panelist is longtime activist, Elizabeth Mitchell, renowned scholar of Black history here in Monroe County and throughout southern Indiana. Liz was the first Black female employee of the U.S. Post Office in Bloomington, so she has long personal experience with race relations in our community. And allow me a plug, Liz will act as hostess in next weekend's Resilience production show, Remarkable Women, at the Monroe County History Center, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. I personally guarantee it will be a memorable and enlightening performance. Our moderator is the esteemed president of the Monroe County branch of the NAACP, Maquiba Reese. Maquiba is associate instructor in IU School of Social Work and assistant director of diversity initiatives for the IU Kelley School of Business. She serves as a board member of Limestone Media and is CEO and owner of Tribe Consulting, LLC. I will add she is the youngest of 13 remarkable siblings. Maquiba, take it away.
I sure will. Happy Sunday, everyone. I'd be remiss if we didn't give a shout out to Guy Loftman for organizing this and getting it really ramped up along with Nashuba. So please give a round of applause to Guy Loftman. I'm so grateful to be able to serve here in Bloomington, Monroe County. I've been here for 13 years because I haven't left after I stepped foot with the Group Scholars Program. So I'm really happy that I'm able to be here, and I'm so grateful for the various leaders and mentors that have poured into me along the way while I'm here. And so I'd be remiss if I didn't give credence where it's supposed to be due. Before I get started, I'd like for us to know what the NAACP stands for. So the NAACP, our newest vision is we are a home of grassroots activists for civil rights and social justice. We advocate, agitate, and litigate for the civil rights due to Black America. In our cities, schools, companies, and courtrooms, we are proudly legacy of W.E.B. Du Bois, Ida B. Wells, Thurgood Marshall, and many other giants. So I just want to make sure if you are interested in joining the NAACP and you have not yet, please come and see one of us so that you can join our esteemed chapter. With that being said, I'll go ahead and go to the panel. They already know some of the questions that I'll go straight to with them. And if you have questions, please feel free to write on your notes, and then we'll have those questions following the panel discussion. But before I start with our questions, I'd like for each panelist to introduce yourself just a little bit more for our community, and just let us know a little bit about you, what we didn't read as it relates to a bio, right? And then I'll go into some of the questions. Would you like to start? Oh, yeah. Dr. Butler?
Okay. Hello, everybody. So I'm Yvette Butler. I'm a professor here at IU. I recently came here, as you heard, from the University of Mississippi, and I was there for about 3 years, and prior to that, I was practicing law and engaging in legislative advocacy in the DC area. I'm also born and raised in South Dakota, so being in Indiana is very similar, very, very familiar. And remind me, did you want me to?
That was good.
Did you want to do bios and then?
Then we'll do questions
Okay.
afterwards. Yep. So we can go ahead with. Thank you.
Afternoon. I was going to say good evening, but good afternoon. I'm Rashad Nelms. It's a pleasure to be with you all today, especially with my esteemed colleagues here on the platform. What can I tell you? I am originally from Gary, Indiana, but we moved around a lot, and so I am a citizen of the Midwest and went to the University of Michigan. graduated with my degree in political science, and I wanted to change the world. And so that's what led me to then pursue my JD, which I earned from the University of Michigan Law School after that. I then decided that I wanted to really take it to a whole new level in terms of changing the world. And so I was very fortunate, and through a series of opportunities, managed to join the United Nations World Food Program. And so we're the world's largest humanitarian organization. We have a budget of more than $7.6 billion. We feed more than 110 million people every single year in more than 110 countries. And so, as Guy mentioned, during the course of my nearly 20-year career with the UN, I was managed offices in sub-Saharan Africa, offices on the borders of Zambia, as well as Angola, as well as Zambia and Malawi. Was a donor relations officer in Islamabad, Pakistan, and most recently served as a head of a communications and fundraising team in Cox's Bazar, which is home to the world's largest refugee camp. I joined IU back in October of 2021, and in my current capacity, I work with the Office of the Vice President for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion to identify strategies and initiatives and opportunities to help the university to realize its full potential, particularly in this moment of the post-pandemic. So it's a pleasure to be with you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Mitchell. I'm called the historian of African American experience and culture in Monroe County. I fell in love with history after graduating from high school just to gain knowledge of what I didn't know and what I wasn't taught in school. So I attended Ball State University and IUPUI, but I graduated from life's experiences. I moved here in 1979 with my husband, who had just gotten a job due to affirmative action as the Indiana State Police trooper. And so he was assigned to Monroe County, and you have to live in the county where you're assigned to work, so thus we came here. I didn't like Bloomington at first, and I thought the way to get to know the community and people was public service. So I started out doing that as a Girl Scout leader and a big sister in the Big Brothers Big Sisters program, and anything that I could do to volunteer my services. And over the years, I have absolutely fell in love with Bloomington. I have been able to do things here that I wouldn't have been able to do in my hometown of Indianapolis. In 2015, with my dear friend and who I call my old sister, Dr. Gladys Devane, and our good friend Danielle Bruce, we formed a production company called Resilience Productions. And this is to tell stories, long forgotten stories, of the African American experience and culture, not only here, but throughout the state of Indiana. We've been very successful and blessed because of this community to have sold out performances in every performance that we do. So get your tickets for next weekend.
All right, with that being said, Dr. Butler, could you start us off with what is critical race theory, and also what does it mean to have a legal concept around critical race theory?
Yeah, and I'm going to take a little bit of creative license with the question. So before I get firmly into the question, I just wanted to provide an anecdote, if you will. So when I was looking for a place to live with my partner, one of the things that I was looking for in every apartment complex was a peephole in the front door. And he asked me, he was like, wait, this one apartment that we looked at is fantastic. Like, it's priced well, it's in a great location, otherwise looks great. Why don't you want it? And I said, oh, well, because it doesn't have a peephole in the front door. And I had to explain to him why that was so important. And I mentioned this not to shame him for not understanding why it's important, but to, I think, situate us in this perspective that, or in this context that perspective matters. Like, he had never had to be aware of why a peephole was so important because of a lot of the societal privilege that he has as a man, very large man, goes to the gym, very bulky, not afraid of anything. And so I had to explain to him like why women often feel the need to check for those sorts of safety measures where they're living. And so for something like critical race theory, I think it's really important to start from the perspective that regardless of, I like how, we talk about story, and I'm sure we'll be coming back to this idea of story and narrative throughout this conversation. But it gets at sort of challenging the story that we have been told about, America, about why racial inequality persists, and all of that. So critical race theory was really started in the 1980s in law schools by law professors to ask the question, if the 1964 Civil Rights Act and other pieces of legislation were such successes, why do we still have such rampant amounts of racial inequality? Like, why does it continue to persist? And that's really all it's about. It's really just a bunch of law professors thinking about how racial inequality continues to show up in wealth, in employment, in housing, really every single sector of our legal system.
That's great. Thank you so much. I feel like you would add another thought after that.
Possibly, because I was like, I think you asked me another part of that question, and I wanted
keep
to.
going,
Okay,
please.
so. And this is where I'm also trying to stay grounded because I majored in philosophy, and I still do a lot of theoretical everything. So this is where I'm trying to stay grounded. So if you think about theories, so like every decision that we make at a legal or policy level has some theory attached to it. Like if we say everybody has to wear masks, that's usually grounded in this idea of, utilitarianism. We have a sense of responsibility toward one another. We shouldn't be so individualistic in saying, I'll be okay, so it doesn't matter if you won't be okay. Like, we all have a need to keep each other safe. And so critical race theory fits into like these various ideas within law to say, how can we think about law? What are different ways that we can think about law? And it asks questions that other legal theories don't. So for example, contemporary legal theory that people generally learn in law school is, all right, we have these legal principles and we can be completely blind to history and social structure and all of that. And like if we take X rule and apply it to Y situation, we mechanically come out with this outcome. And critical race theory challenges that for reasons that I'm happy to get into.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Next up, we'll have Rashad. So I'm curious, so critical race theory recognizes that racism is embedded in laws, policies, and institutions. And so I'd be curious about how does critical race theory impact operations such as higher education?
I think that it's important to distinguish, and I'm sure that we'll have an opportunity throughout the afternoon to discuss this in a bit more detail, but critical race theory is just that, it's a theory, right? It's one that I subscribe to. Having said that, though, it's not prescriptive, it's descriptive. And I think that's a critical nuance that we need to unpack and to appreciate, right? Because I think what tends to happen is that we look at CRT and that is the holy grail. And so therefore it informs everything that we do, whether it's in higher education, whether it's in medicine, whether it's in business, whatnot. Whereas it provides a framework in which we can look at higher education, look at business, look at the not-for-profit world, right? So then to answer your question, when I'm considering CRT within higher education, for instance, it's figuring out where are the institutional obstacles and impediments to the historical other, right, in their success. So is it going to be financial aid or lack thereof? Is it going to be the speed in which we disperse financial aid? Is it going to be becoming more involved as an institution of higher learning in the K through 12 in order to create this pipeline so that they're more prepared and they're able to matriculate within 4 to 6 years. That's where CRT comes in. It helps me to, or helps institutions to think a bit more broadly and to focus on the other, and then to create the conditions to facilitate the success of the other. And I think that's going to become even more important because we're living in a world, and it's not to compare it with intersectionality, the legal term, but I truly believe that in this post-pandemic world, what we're seeing is this merging, right? So what happens in the environment, let's say you're the state of Indiana and you're trying to facilitate foreign investment, it's not enough just to have the land. You need to have an educated workforce. You need to have a supportive healthcare system. You need to have great infrastructure. All of a sudden, things are intersecting, right? And we're going to see more of that. And so as we think about critical race theory, DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, and other initiatives and policies and theories, it's going to be important for those to be considered, right? Because they're without these things, you can't have the economic development, you can't have the health, which will facilitate the foreign investment. That's a long-winded answer.
It's a great answer. I mean, if you want to keep going too, please feel free. Listen, we free up here. Be free.
No,
y'all got more
no.
to add, please do it. I got questions, but if y'all want to ask them, that's okay with me. Liz Mitchell, I have a question for you. And this doesn't have to only be candid to your solo experience, because I know that you also have some historical knowledge as well. But I'd be curious about your experience with critical race theory as it pertains to your lived narratives here in Bloomington locally, or just your lived narratives.
Well, since I'm the old lady of the group out there, if I go back to being raised and growing up in segregation, and then seeing how kids are coming along now, I think, oh wow, a lot of the problems that are new and that have evolved since desegregation, I hadn't had the experience with that, especially within schools, because in a segregated school, you had your black teachers and all your black kids, and they knew how to straighten you up. There was no discipline problems. You weren't sent to the principal. Your teacher could handle that business right in classroom. If it was just a look, you knew. Well, now, when kids are sitting in classrooms and stuff with white teachers, maybe because of their lack of experience, they don't know. They don't understand the swagger of the youth of a young black man. And that's threatening and frightening. And where does all that come from? Is that part of critical race theory? I've been asking myself these questions since CRT has been developed. Who's behind that? When did it become political? Why are people afraid of it? Why is you saying we can't teach certain things in school that our youth need to know? So these are all new for me, new questions probably for you too, and sometimes it can be a bit confusing as to what is really happening. But I think the basis between then and now is that the fear has probably gotten even greater in some instances. There's just this fear of the unknown. And since we have gotten rid of segregation, why is there still that unknown, that we don't know each other?
Yeah, that's a good question. And a lot of what you're alluding to, it perhaps could be this idea of fear mongering. Like, why is this fear shadowing over us as it relates to critical race theory? And this is an open question for the entire panel. My question is, how can we advance critical race theory locally? And if you have any ideas of how we can advance it nationally too, that'd be great, but more so locally. Like, how can we as a community advance critical race theory in our own individual spaces?
Go ahead.
So I guess one thing that I want to start with is critical race theory proper noun, the thing that legal scholars use, versus various concepts that may or may not be CRT concepts. So for example, things like systemic racism are not CRT proper. Things like systemic racism are explored in a variety of disciplines, and then critical race theorists often subscribe to this idea that like systemic racism exists and we should stop focusing so much on the individual bad actor because that prevents our ability to ask, questions about structures and institutions. And so I think when we talk about, what we want to promote, I think it's less about critical race theory proper noun and more about, are we talking about history? Are we talking about empirical data that demonstrates the ways in which, a lot of Black and other like historically underrepresented minority students are falling behind? So I think, my question is, what are the things that we want to advance? And is it actually CRT?
Right.
Because doing CRT is more about, so for example, looking at, for example, Derek Bell was the grandfather, or considered the grandfather of critical race theory. And one of his theories within critical race theory is interest convergence, where, he essentially argues that, while people might like to say, in K through 12, we're going to teach kids that there was slavery, and then Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, and then there were some terrible people that were still being really racist, and then MLK marched, and now everything is fine. One of Bell's points was, no, like it's not just about hearts and minds. It's that, if you look at the congressional record around the time that large historical events were happening, the conversation was, it's smart to desegregate the military for national security reasons. Or, like Brown v. Board, it's important to protect that because of national security reasons. So like interest convergence is the idea that, we can look at our laws and policies and the context in which they were passed to make a broader point about, racial justice is only advanced when it's convenient or when it serves another purpose. And so like that is doing CRT, is like doing all that research and making those kinds of arguments, as opposed to like culturally competent teaching, for example.
I'm so glad that you elaborated on that because because it's important to distinguish the two, right? And again, I think people have the best interest at heart when they say I'm an advocate for CRT, but don't necessarily understand what it is. And I really love the way that you were able to break it down and yeah.
And I basically had that thought too, that most people didn't know what they were talking about when they talk about CRT, especially the politicians. They have no clue.
Which, if I can build on that, not only, to some extent, it's not having a clue, and to some extent, it's willful ignorance, and to some extent, it's maliciousness, which builds into things I have to say later.
Can we please just keep going? Can you help us understand the malicious intent of the breakdown of critical race theory, please?
Yeah. I wish I had this on a slide. Actually, because I have it on a slide, but not here. Show of hands if you've heard the name Christopher Rufo. Okay, a couple of people. Christopher Rufo is essentially a conservative strategist who was very public about the game that's being played. And he has this tweet from a few years ago, you can definitely look it up, RUFO, where he says, basically the goal is to taint the brand critical race theory so that whenever we use that term, it is associated with all of these ills. And it doesn't matter that it has nothing to do with CRT, but the game is taint the brand so that anytime you bring up CRT, which, again, like will lead into all these other things that we're talking about culturally competent teaching, anything about race, and everything to like, a lot of the books that are being banned right now is like they get swallowed up under this umbrella of critical race theory. And And so yes, that is part of the maliciousness. So I never want to say that any politician is being particularly malicious because I don't know, and like I'm not going to make assumptions about somebody's heart, but there is so much information out there about what CRT actually is, which is why I say at this point it's willful ignorance, because it's been around since the 80s.
Just to build on that, I think you mentioned in your first set of responses, you asked a question, not asked a question, but implicitly there was this question of what? CRT for what? And I think that's the question that we as a society, at least in the US, right, we have to answer, right? Because CRT, just like diversity, equity, inclusion, consists of a series of principles, of theories, of tools and resources to do what, right? And I think that given the society, the reality in which we live in now, where I think people, many of us in this room probably, want some sense of stability, want some sense of equilibrium, but don't necessarily know how to create it, what it will look like, right? And I think that contributes then to people going back to, whether it's voting for Biden or voting for Trump, they go back to what they know. This is a really strong or a really amazing opportunity for us to rethink what can be. And if we take take this moment to think about what can be, all of a sudden it's not CRT that we're trying to achieve. It's not DEI that we're trying to achieve. Those become the mechanisms or the vehicles to achieve that future of what can be, right? So that future could be, we want better health performance for all groups. That's an aspirational goal of what can be. We want to have students graduating in the 99th percentile. That's an aspiration of what can be. We want individuals who are able to leverage both AI as well as their intellect in a way that will inform profit margins or that inform new innovations. That's what can be. CRT, DEI, and other vehicles are just that. They're vehicles to help realize that vision of what can be.
And I think part of that, you mentioned health and education. People want food security. You want to feel secure in your home. Just the basics, just those simple things. And why should that be so difficult to achieve? It's the question for me.
Yeah, so I really love this discussion because it helps us to separate that there are multiple things at play, right? And so as we know, critical race theory, it recognizes that racism is more than a result of individual and bias and prejudices. It really alludes to this idea of colorblind, right? And so I'd be curious, and this is open for the panel, there is a difference between critical race theory and there's systemic oppression that was mentioned earlier. Can you all help us focus on the point of systemic oppression, perhaps of what people are really trying to discuss when it comes to critical race theory? And then if you could give us some suggestions for the audience to implement in our own spaces of influence.
Great list.
Know your role, know your role. Look to your left and look to your right.
Well, I mean, you had this great list, talking about what people's needs are. I feel like you could expand on that.
Well, okay, I'll try to. Let's take education. We want our kids to be able to go to school and enjoy that experience in their youth, would have to worry about being disciplined for various reasons. I've been reading a lot lately, and it's come back again from a while, hair. You've been disciplined because of your hair. Our hair isn't accepted yet either. So just little things like that are so questionable. And how does that hurt the youth? And then because of the world we're in now with social media, that gets out within minutes. So it's not only that individual student, but you got other students. And that come from back in the day when I was rocking with my afro. And I was told, you can't go to work with that afro. You're gonna intimidate people. You're gonna scare white people. So you gotta press your hair. And so, and even Oprah Winfrey, starting out in her career, had to change her hair. And so it's, to me, accepting people as they are, and it seems like that's still a difficult process. Healthcare. Black women, as we know, I hope you know, don't receive the health care that they should. Is that part of CRT too? And food insecurities. We're in America. What are you talking about? But that exists too. We do know, and it happens here in Bloomington, that the kids in school, black kids, are disciplined more than white kids. Black people are stopped by the police, and more are incarcerated. We're 4% of the population. Why is so many incarcerated? I was with a group yesterday, and they were talking about, I was talking to a historian who said in 1866, less than 100 black men were in prison in America. By 1875, it was over 2,000. So it's building upon that fear and lies being told that came out of even Africa, to be afraid of black men, be afraid of the different colors. So then he brought in this colorism thing, that if you're light, you're a little bit better, and be careful about the dark ones, and all that kind of thing.
Yeah. And I think to really build off of that, because I think you really alluded to this, like there are historical and societal reasons why people have those biases, which gets into issues of implicit bias, which again is not CRT specific. Like it comes out of psychology research to talk about how the brain works, how we develop both implicit and explicit biases and act upon them. But like CRT will bring it in to use to make legal arguments about what the law should do about it, for example. But I think that gets to, again, this idea of, we're not just worried about the individual teacher who calls the cops on a black student. Like we are concerned about that, but we're also concerned with why does the teacher have those biases such that they have then called the cops on this student? Right. And like that gets to the systemic issues and implicit bias and things like that are at play that CRT is so concerned with. I also have a hypothetical because I'm a law professor, but if you have anything to... Okay, so I can't be a law professor up here and not throw out a hypothetical. And this is, again, to also reiterate how these different theories sort of work in practice. So hypothetical, which is not at all a hypo. A black individual is stopped by law enforcement. They are not under arrest. The Constitution gives them the right to end the encounter if they are not under arrest. The person does not end the encounter. Instead, they consent to answering questions and being searched. Under contemporary legal theory, like the way that, judges like to say, oh, well, law is objective and neutral. Generally, you say, well, the law provides people with rights. That person had a right. They didn't exercise it. Whatever follows from the law enforcement encounter is their own problem. Like, it was up to them to assert their rights. Just by a point of comparison, because I also do feminist legal theory, if you take that same example, a feminist legal theorist might say, let's talk more about power imbalances. In the sexual assault context, a power imbalance leads to acquiescence and not consent. Perhaps the encounter with the officer was not consensual, even though the person had the right to disengage. So because of that power imbalance between these people. And then CRT would say, the centuries-long abuse of power by the state against black people and the present-day disproportionate abuses of power, injury and death of black people at the hands of police, play a role in whether this person would feel free to end the encounter. And the law needs to take that into account. And so again, like as we're talking about sort of systemic issues, it's really like, okay, well, what role does history and society play in how the law should resolve these problems? Which takes us right back to, color blindness.
Right. Anything to add at the moment? Okay.
I concur. Well said.
I know. Well, so audience members, I know you all might have some questions brewing. We'll get to you all pretty soon, but I got a couple more. So if you have some questions, our people will walk around and get you ready, okay? I have a couple more questions. Curious, what is the number one way, or it doesn't have to be one, it can be a couple of ways. What is a way that we can make a difference within our community? I keep coming back to our community because it's really important for us to have some, hopefully we can have some takeaways. But what do you believe, how can we make a difference within our community as it relates to critical race theory and the separation of systemic oppression? Because our community really does this thing where we mush things together, and there are often times when we're really reactive versus proactive. So I'd be curious of how can we make a difference within our community. Any thoughts there?
I would say this. Again, for what? It comes back for what? We are doing those things for what? What's the end goal, right? And use the end goal to inform how you approach and what you do, right? Because I think what often happens is we'll leave here and we'll say, all right, I got it, and it kind of stops. Versus if you make clear, all right, so here's an example of what you can do, right? Let's say the next time that you are in a predominantly white, I don't know, waiting room or office or whatnot, maybe it's just asking yourself, I wonder what's contributing to this atmosphere. What could be at play here? Is it the lack of communication? Is it lack of effective communication? Or is it that it's too hard for disadvantaged groups to arrive here, right? It's asking those questions. Because that's what, and again, I think a lot of us in this room who are the historical other, that's what we have to do all the time. You're constantly vigilant. You're hypersensitive to words, the inflection, the tone, the physical distance. It's that constant vigilance that helps to keep us alive, right? But also enables us to know things that many in the majority maybe don't necessarily know about themselves, right? So it's going to take that kind of deliberate and intentional work, maybe not every single moment, but start with one moment a day and just ask yourself, okay, why? Why not? Right? That would be my strategy.
Anyone else? I wrote that down for those that asked, oh, what should I do afterwards? I wrote that down, so I'll let you know.
Can I also just say this? I was on my way over here and I thought of what would that be? IIAC is what I came up with. IIAC. The first I is you have to be intentional. The second I is that you have to be innovative. It might not be a strategy or solution or something that you have even heard of, much less tried, but you have to be innovative in contemplating potential solutions. The A is accountability, right? I think too many times it's, well, tell us what to do. I can't do that, right? But there is that accountability that all of us have to bear. And the last one is C, be courageous, right? It's very easy to talk the talk. It's much more difficult to actually follow through. And by following through, you are putting yourself out there. You might be on the island and you might be isolated and your friends might look at you differently, but that comes with the territory. So.
I think it's interesting that you brought this up, and I really appreciate that. Yesterday, I was asked by a woman saying, how can we make things better between the races? What can I do? And I said, well, at this age, I'm tired of explaining. You tell me what you're going to do. You think about it. Don't put the ball in my court. You do the thinking. You do the, because it's easier, everybody wants to ask the black person, well, what do you think about this and how should we do this? You tell me what you're gonna do. Come up with some answers. And then we'll have a discussion about what I think you ought to do.
That's good. I like that.
Y'all can yell,
Yeah.
do it. What you need? Go on and clap if you need to. It's good.
Which I had something which I think sort of falls along those lines, which is let somebody, so if, because I know, I mean, along the lines of, you know, historically marginalized people having to do all of that labor of explaining why things are so bad and what should be done about them. One of the things that I often encourage people to do is ask more questions of the person who is coming to you with that labor. So if they're just like, I don't understand, why should we privilege Black people in the educational admissions process? Like, why should affirmative action be a thing? Just ask them like, oh, well, why do you think it shouldn't be? Or like, why do you think, just tell me more about your position. And just ask questions. Because I think some of what gets really interesting and really spicy is watching people grapple with their prejudices as they come out of their mouth. Because, one of the, which not to get on too much of a tangent, but one of the main tenets of CRT is essentially that race has been socially constructed by law, by society. And that was really pushing back against old junk science that argued that there were inherent differences between the races, like Black people are inherently lazy, stupid, etc. White people are inherently entrepreneurial and beautiful and whatever. And so sometimes if you're having a conversation with somebody and they're questioning like, oh, well, all the Black students here must have gotten here through affirmative action. It's like, oh, well, why do you think that? And watch them potentially hang themselves by recognizing that they have this bias, that they actually do think that every single Black person they see is inherently inferior. And if they don't believe that, or if they don't want to believe that, then what are their arguments against things like affirmative action? And then it pushes you in a more productive space as opposed to having the same 101 conversation over and over and over again. And I also agree, dare to dream, dare to be creative about what the future could look like and how we could potentially get there, because we can't get to a more utopian future if we never dare to dream for it.
And just to pick up on what you said earlier, just a minute ago, I think part of the challenge is, and we never say it explicitly, but it's there, I think, beneath the surface, and there's this tension. This is, what we're talking about is not a zero-sum game. And I think too frequently or too many times we see it as, well, it's the Black and Latinos and the Asians, and they're gonna take from me, and it's, well, no. It's all ships rise, right? So it's how do we change that mindset, which is then pervasive in the development of institutional policies and programs and initiatives, right? It drives that. So how do you change that? Where would you, or how would you as an individual begin to facilitate that change?
I think that strong word with facilitation is key, because a lot of times, often people believe that they have to be an expert at a subject matter, which is important, right? It holds some value, but we have to learn how, I believe that learning how to facilitate conversation and facilitate that change to dream and to dare is just as important. And with that being said, we're going to open it up for the audience. If you all have questions, I'm sure some of y'all have some burning questions. I have a couple more, but I want to pause for a second so our audience can ask some questions. Anyone in the audience want to be brave and go first? Not that you're not already brave being here, but we have a brave person right here with this Tuskegee representing. I see you, girl. All right, here we come. We coming. Just give us a second. Please introduce yourself to us as well.
but, I had to push it back for you, yeah, with the idea of like, you're not taking spots from someone else. So right now, I'm an admissions ambassador for the law, and I know that there's not a certain amount of spots that they have to fill, and it's more of how many, like, that comes in. It's not necessarily like, oh, we're only accepting 200 students this admission cycle. Well, no, we're only allowing 200 in the next class. And so how do you, I guess, push back on that notion of like, minority students are taking spots from a white student or even American student or, yeah.
Leading towards affirmative action, sounds like a little bit.
Yeah, we talked about affirmative action a lot in our seminar, but it's,
Yeah,
I guess
it's a good
I
question.
need like tools because I know that I'm not taking anybody's spot and nobody has a spot. And I guess that's the whole thing, nobody has a spot.
Right.
You're not entitled to, nobody, black, white, you're not entitled to a spot. But I guess it's just this, I don't know,
It's a good question.
yeah. Oh yeah, my alma mater is Tuskegee University.
Okay, represent. I see your sweater. Thank you. Thank you for the question.
We were in school.
I can answer
Yeah,
Val.
please.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so I do think it's important to come back around to this idea that, I mean, affirmative action has successfully been painted as a terrible light. And I think I want to say, I can't actually remember which seminar this was in, but somebody made this great point. They said when they were interviewing for jobs at law firms and that law firm had no women, it was shocking to everybody. And we are still getting to this place where the lack of racial minorities is that much of a shock. And I think that really stuck with me in terms of like how we talk about affirmative action, how we talk about who's allowed in certain spaces, who is worthy of being in certain spaces. And I think it comes back to remembering that nobody is ever let in who's not already qualified. We have a lot of assumptions about what qualification means and like why do we only think in terms of what you've already accomplished as opposed to what you have the capacity to accomplish. And then there are a lot of, I think, underlying issues that we are still grappling with around why we have affirmative action and the way that we talk about it in terms of letting in people whose qualifications we're suspicious of, as opposed to tempering the over-representation of people who, have always had spots. And so we talk about it, we don't usually talk about it in terms of over-representation, which if you're interested, I think everybody should read the book, When Affirmative Action Was White, by Ira Katznelson, because he goes through a variety of laws and policies on the books that have essentially privileged white people such that they could be overrepresentative in certain spaces. And so I think it's important to have that conversation alongside the how has law and policy worked to reduce the number of racial minorities in certain spaces. So I hope that gives you any fodder. Okay.
Thank you.
I'll also say this, and it's, what I just quickly jotted down, SPC. It's stakeholders, partners, and collaborators. Stakeholders, partners, and collaborators. Because what I picked up from what the question that you were asking is, what can you do? And I appreciate that. That's a heavy burden to carry on one's own, right? And so what needs to happen, and what I would suggest you do, is identify your key stakeholders, your key partners, and collaborators who can amplify and speak for you or speak on behalf of the broader group in spaces where you're not present. For instance, maybe it's going to be behind, at a bar and someone's having a drink, and that person who's a collaborator will say, you know what, actually, affirmative action is this. Or it might be that professor who is in the faculty senate and is saying, this is what it's really about, right? Because again, the more of a course that you're able to create, the more effective you'll be, would be my argument. Doesn't mean you don't say anything. It just means that how do you amplify that message in key moments and key situations?
I want to speak to what you said earlier. I was taking notes on what you said. I was so interested in it. You talked about qualifications and affirmative action. And since I went through that with my husband, he would have not gotten a job as a state trooper had it not been for that lawsuit in 1972. That's just flat out the truth. So then, since Indiana had to hire black men to become state police officers, there were roundtable discussions on how can we make them quit? How can we make life difficult for them? I'm working on a documentary about that. That is a truth. Just recently, last couple of years, I've interviewed 10 white men. One question: what are you afraid of? That's all I want to know. I believe 3 in my heart answer truthfully. We're afraid you're going to treat us like we've treated you. You're going to take our stuff. And we've had power for so long, to relinquish that power is frightening to us. I believe that. And so then what do you do with that information? How do you make years, hundreds of years of misinformation that started coming out of Africa, probably by the 1%, of why I can take your stuff? Because you're so frightening, you eat each other, you carry diseases. We can use religion. The Bible says you're supposed to obey your master. I'm your master. And so do we still have a little of that going on too? Because look how many years, it takes years, and they think everything is so slow to change and to change those mindsets. So a little bit of those kernels are still going on there too. And then you mentioned qualifications again, like we said. For me to get hired in the post office, I had to take a test and make a high score on that test. I left Indianapolis and came here, and the first thing I've had now, I'm the first black woman walking in the door. How'd she pass that test? And the first, what are you doing in here? You're taking a job from a white guy. Well, I've got my own job. And so then it went from there, can I touch your hair? Can I touch your skin? How do you spend your money? All of these questions, and I've never been around a black person before, so I want to know. And all of these questions, and then you had to take a test to keep the job, test after test. Well, she's not going to pass that test. So you had all of that to go through because people were curious, and they had in their head that you didn't deserve it, and you're dumb, and you got here for some other reason than your qualifications.
And that reminds me of the phrasing, and maybe you guys can help me with this if I butcher it, which I might, but it's not that you got in because you're, what is it? Well, basically, you did it in spite of everything put in front of you. So, and the same sort of work twice as hard to get half as far. It's the same sort of, I think, overlooking all of the efforts that minorities have to put in to even get into a space, and that disbelief that you managed to do it.
Thank y'all so much. Thank you for that question. It generated a lot of conversation, so we appreciate that. We have another question in the back, Dr. Nils.
I just want to make sure, first of all, thank you all so much for your comments and thanks for the questions. The thing that I hope we all leave with is the fact that CRT is not a program. It's a theoretical framework for understanding and explaining situations which would then help to influence or inform how we go about addressing it. CRT is not a program. And the way it's been posited by certain members of the state legislature is that we need to get rid of these programs. So I just want to make sure we all leave with that. Now, here are 3 things we can all do. Here are 3 things we can all do. Will you come hold this mic for me, my sister, so I can't multitask the way a lot of you young people can, so. But So there are three things that I think that we can do. First of all, I think we have to take personal responsibility. We have to get out of our comfort zone. We're just too comfortable. Take personal responsibility for what? The what is the disparate treatment of black children, as an example, okay? The lack of black teachers and counselors and social workers, for example, take a personal responsibility for helping to change that. Oh, see here, I'm sorry. My says identify myself with my face, but I can't do that. The second thing is don't accept the status quo. Status quo is we looked for some, we couldn't find them. Okay, we're trying. Third, stop pretending that policies, practices, and programs are fair, that they are race, class, or gender neutral. They're not. And then finally, become engaged as an individual in those organizations, your fraternities, your sororities, all of your little social clubs and groups, your bridge clubs and everything. Challenge them to take on some personal responsibility, and it may be an initiative that they will engage in. Those are four things, though, that no matter who you are, where you live, okay, whether you're from this county or another city, those are four things that we can all really do concretely.
Thank you so much. That's good. I wrote all four of those down. Anyone other questions?
It sounds like the strategies you're talking about using in order to activate or enable CRT involve citizen activism, which is wonderful. But the little demon in the back of my head is saying, what about powerful corporations who poison water? Who are distributing misinformation? How, from the point of view of CRT, can we address that?
Can you
Did you hear that?
repeat that? Try the microphone, please. Is it?
Can you hear me?
Let's see the other one.
It is on, but you can feel free to use this one, please. Okay, excuse me. Thank you. No problem.
Okay, there, that's better. Melanie Hunt? It sounds like you are endorsing the idea, which I am totally on board with, of using citizen activism to address the issues that are being talked about in CRT. I'm also concerned about, and this is one of those things that I can't envision a solution to, so I'm hoping you might have a direction. What about powerful corporations who are poisoning the waters with misinformation about CRT to start with and everything else? Do you have any thoughts on that?
So the question, you want to respond to it? Okay. I'm gonna ask the panelists if they wanted to respond, and then Al.
Hi. Yeah. Well.
Okay.
This discussion is very interesting, and I've learned a lot by sitting here listening. I'm so happy to see we have a professor of law here at our U Memorial. We've been working on that for years, and we finally got up to about 4. Then we found we lost some, and now we got another one back. I am so happy you're here, honey. Believe me. Excuse me for saying honey, but that's a muck of But I'm so happy you're here. The question this young lady raised over here about the recruitment of law students is one that's really ancient. We were discussing this whole matter back in 1972 when I was Director of Human Relations. It's a very critical question as to understanding how we are being selected. But I'm glad to see the panel here, because I've known Liz for a long time. I'm glad to meet Rashad here. I've known his father for many, many years. What we got a problem now is much more serious than CRT, and that is the problem of hate. unfortunately, it's not only just in our country, but it's also a matter of international. Now, this lady asked a question about what stimulate this kind of stuff. Our Attorney General, the current Attorney General, has attacked CRT and mischaracterized it here in the state of Indiana. It's not just the organizations which you referred to before previously. So it's people in the legal system who is also doing this. Now the question I have though as a lawyer is how would I use it in my practice if I'm practicing law? I'm pretty sure the law students would be interested in that because we have a law professor who teaches the course. I agree with Charlie that the whole idea of this concept of CRT is not really a theory. It's a bunch of little thoughts, philosophical thoughts and theories, and the intersectionality. I agree with Rashawn totally, absolutely. It involves more than just law. It involves science. It involves social concerns. It involves economics. It involves political science. These things all intersect and are dealing with the problem of racism in American society, and that's what my experience has been. But then the work of the platform didn't just start with the law students, lawyers. Okay, I would agree with though that Derek Bell started his work at Harvard University doing his research, and he wrote the book called Race in American Law, Race in American Law. We premiered, that's a thick book. Right? But let me just tell you something. IU had something to do with the development of critical race theory. Because when I graduated from law school here in Bloomington, Indiana, in 1972, I was offered a job. That job was offered to me by Vice Chancellor Herman Hudson as Director of Human Relations for the Bloomington campus. And he asked me to teach 2 courses. They were both civil rights courses. One course he wanted to say racism in the law, and the other was black community law and social change. I had a book for the second course, but I didn't have a book for the first course, which is racism in the law. But at the same time, Derek Bell was working on his book for the law students at Harvard. Okay, I wasn't aware of that, but I became aware of Bell's book much later. We used the materials that we put together for that course, and it was critical theory, if you want to call it that, because we were having discussions about racism and the law. But it was on the First Amendment, based upon the First Amendment, not the 14th Amendment. I think you understand what I'm talking about. Okay. So the students, this was an undergraduate course. It wasn't a graduate course, honey. It was an undergraduate course with 200 level students or above. And we had discussions that we're having now, just like now, to have this discussion. And I had a good sized class. And they continued to teach much over the years by other professors after I terminated. So when we say when it started, I have to go back and say it really started in 1972. In addition, I want to say that I don't think critical race theory is confined to lawyers. It also involved social scientists who were doing research, quantitative and qualitative work, and using narratives, Elizabeth, to describe what the phenomena about race is going on in American society. So I just want to expand your knowledge, a little information. I've learned a lot from all 3 of you here. I really appreciate this performance. And I was trying to go back and reflect on some things that I could contribute to the conversation. But I think that this mischaracterization of critical race theory and trying to straighten that out is extremely important, because we have so much hate going on in our society now, and the Southern Law Poverty Center and the FBI and other sources telling us it's on the rise rather than going down. So we've got to deal with that. Thank you.
Yeah, and so before it gets lost, and I'll come back to something that you just said, but I think part of our silence after your question about misinformation was us thinking about exactly how we wanted to respond, because it's a big question. And I think, so yes, I think definitely some of the things that people have said about, or even what you were saying about stakeholders, partners, constituents, having these conversations, being at events like these, making sure that you're right on the facts helps you then, tell your friends, family, et cetera, other people you know. And I think it's about sort of preserving the truth in a variety of ways, such that when misinformation comes up, you have that conversation or you pass along some resources. But I think, we're dealing with misinformation in a lot of ways right now, and I think a lot of people are struggling and thinking really hard about how do we address this.
I feel overwhelmed. I mean, me as an individual against, Sunoco or something?
Yeah. And so I think we've been here before with a variety of things. And I often think about, like language and the ways that like political correctness did not have the meaning that it has now. Woke did not have the meaning that, people on the right are currently trying to make it have. And so like there is always this sort of evolution and consistent tension around language and meaning and things like that. And so, yes, it's a struggle. And I think really quickly, so yes, there are, to sort of respond to a couple things you said. Thanks for your contributions. There are definitely studies there have definitely been a lot of classes that look at sort of how race and law interact. And so, a lot of my comments here are really focused on proper noun, CRT as we understand it as being born in the legal academy. But every single discipline has critical studies that are focused on race, gender, et cetera, and like taking those sort of critical perspectives. And one of the things that makes CRT particularly unique, particularly in the legal academy, is its sort of the way that it sort of welcomes in social sciences and humanities as a legitimate part of legal analysis. I just wanted to sort of throw that out there.
I appreciate your question. Large corporations, to me, with most of them, is the greed. And you mentioned poisoning the water with information. Well, what about those that actually poison the water? Right. And so it all boils down to helping their profit margin. What do you put out there for that? And it all boils down to money. It seems that way to me. It's about how much more, if you own billions of dollars, how many more billions do you need? And how many more people do you hurt to get it? So that plays into what Al Mann said, this hate.
I think it also,
I'm gonna interrupt for a second. Sorry, just because we want to keep going. I know that we want to keep that going. It's great, but if you wanted to finish that part, and then we'll go to the next person.
She was saying something.
Okay.
I was listening to her.
it's more than greed, it's about power. It's about controlling society.
Okay.
Power, money,
Thank you so much.
So, let's see, my name's Jean Lave. I'm a critical theorist and a social anthropologist, and I'm very glad for the notion that you've been saying that although we're talking about race and the law, that in fact what's interesting to me about CRT in a simple sense is that indeed it insists on the importance of social analysis, of being crucial to the understanding and practice of change in the law and everything else. It strikes me that, first of all, thank you for bringing up capitalism and social class, which when you talk about greed, power, money, powerlessness, and so on, we mustn't forget that, and that it's the political economic system in which we live is one which would be an answer, offer answers to all of the whys around the, it's one broad philosophy and an analysis of all of the things we've been talking about and how they have come to be. that wasn't the point I wanted to make, which was to say that it seems to me that if we want to contribute through either, it's been couched, what can we do? And our answers, either the panels or ours, have all been individual. They've all been, can we have conversations with others, or can we somehow, what can we contribute? And I think we could contribute, and the nice idea of changing the conversations that we have. It strikes me that what CRT offers that would help us to change those conversations are two, at least, very serious principles. One is that that racism and sexism and these other forms of unjust social living are historically, they are made what they are today by their historical production. That's still going on. It's a process, and it's still going on. And the other is that the structural racism, or systemic racism, whatever you want to call it, seems to me an absolutely crucial point. So when I think about affirmative action fights in the university, I've been in them longer than you have. It was always, do you think what affirmative action is for? Is because you're trying to do charity to people who don't deserve it? Or do you look at the university in particularly as a profoundly racist institution, which I guarantee you it is? And then the question is, affirmative action is a way of trying to address, however, those structural ills in the university. DEI, by the way, is a very dicey way to go about it. We should have a discussion with that afterwards. But meanwhile, if you want to change individual conversations, I think that trying to focus them on both the historical production of how did we get to where we are now, how is where we are now the product of where we've been coming from, and the second question, what are the structural forces at work that around us? Those are the ones we ought to be talking about, trying to do something about. Thanks, sorry, I've gone on and on.
So I'm going to hopefully speak to both your questions, but primarily the second one. Part of the challenge that we're having in this room in particular is an echo chamber. People who are here are already probably understanding or desire to understand what CRT is, right? So you're preaching to the converted. The real challenge becomes, right? The real challenge becomes, how do you meet people where they are? There you go. Right? You only need 51% for victory. How do you get to that 51%, right? That's fine.
Structurally,
right.
51%.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean anything. That's descriptive.
Mm-hmm. So structurally, structures are reflections of people and their attitudes, right? The policies that they create, the initiatives that they implement, the products that they generate, those are reflections of individuals. And the attitudes and the experiences that they bring to bear influence those things, right? The importance of meeting people where they are, they're not going to, if I were to beat them, not even beat them over the head, if I were to say, it's important that you know about the history, people's eyes are going to glaze over. I have a fundamental understanding and respect for history, but I have to meet that person where they are. So the question then becomes, how do I reframe or rephrase the conversation such that we can converge? And that goes back to the Derek Bell piece, right? Where you can have your disagreements, I heard you, You know, that's, if you take a look at Abe Lincoln and the freeing of the slaves, that was not done out of goodwill. That was because of recognition that we need more troops. If we take a look at Brown versus Board, part of that was economic. Part of it was also the fact that we were trying to combat the Russians and communism, right? So there are other forces at play that influence these systematic policies, these systematic issues, right? So my thought then is, you've got to meet people where they are. You've got to change the conversation such that it allows them to at least get their foot in the door. And then if you want to talk about the historical pieces to help inform that discussion, so be it. But we've got to figure out a way for the people who aren't in this room, why aren't they here? Why aren't they here? And what we need to say, or what could we do to get them to be here? Or do we need to go to them? And what would that look like?
Did any of the other panelists wanted to chime in? I know you guys wasn't expecting this since I was going to be on the panel, but I have a question for you guys. And this question is, I guess, coming from a little selfish place since I'm writing my thesis on, I guess, this particular issue. But I really want to leverage each of you guys' backgrounds on a global perspective. I know we've been talking about things very locally in terms of here in Bloomington as well as in the United States. But could each of you please elaborate as to, have you seen CRT as a vehicle operate on the global spectrum in different countries in terms of their legal policies in education or food insecurity? For an example, I think of, it's funny that you mentioned combating the Russians, World War II. That was also during the time where Emmett Till was lynched, and a lot of people was like, hey, you're being judgmental to the Nazis about what they're doing about the Jews, but look what you guys are doing to your Black citizens. So I use that as an example to ask you guys if you could please give us a different perspective of your backgrounds of how you've seen CRT play out on a global spectrum. Just recently, last year in 2002, CRT made it to the British Parliament. I had no idea about that. So if you could maybe elaborate, narratives is of what CRT about. I am also a student apprentice of Professor Butler up there and all of the rest of the CRT gurus, I like to call them, in terms of me learning from them. But could you please elaborate in terms of on a global perspective, just to show, I guess, why this theory is so monumental?
I'll start off, and I think he's probably traveled more than me. I've been making a point of traveling the world since I retired. I also make a point of talking to the indigenous people, like in New Zealand and Australia and everywhere. I want to see who these original people are, and they're going through the same things. And it's a point of the majority who's ever come in and taken over. It's time now to listen. You have to listen. And so people want what they felt was theirs, give it back, or just listen to my concerns and not just have everything the way you want it. That's probably something worldwide we need to do, is just listen. Because the world's not that big. We're a world community, one community. And one thing we have all in common, we're all people. We want the same things. So if we pay attention and listen to that, it seems to me the people that we talked about being greedy, the globals, do those people not know you're not here that long? That's the question I had. You may have good 80 years going for you. You're not here that long for all the hatred and distrust and stuff we have. And that kind of boggles my mind a little bit. But that's been my experience with traveling, is to make sure I talk to people. And even, like you said, in Europe, those people are having the same questions that we're having. And it just, to me, doesn't seem like it should be in this day and age, what we talked about a century ago.
So there are layers to your question, and so I'll provide a layered response. First of all, CRT, at least in my mind, based on my work, in different countries is a very U.S. thing, right? Very U.S. Like if you go to Zimbabwe, I'm pretty doubtful you're going to hear someone saying CRT. Or if you go to Bangladesh, doubt they're going to be talking about CRT. If you go to Pakistan, India, right? It's a very U.S. thing. Even in Canada, I'm not sure if they label it CRT, but I could be wrong. So with that being said, though, I think what we're fundamentally talking about when we use CRT, it really is about recognizing the other. And so that's going to be the struggle moving forward. It's always been there. But I think that with global warming, climate change, and you have populations moving in from, let's say, Jordan into Egypt, from Egypt into Sudan, and so on and so forth, all of a sudden it's how do you maintain a government while recognizing and potentially empowering the other? How do you get that equilibrium right? And I think CRT helps to speak to that, right? Which looks at everything from the development of your government policies, your food safety nets, your educational system. How does ethnicity, for instance, if you have 110 tribes, right, in Zambia, how do you make sure you develop policies and programs that reflect all 110? Does it mean you have to accommodate all the different dialects? Does it mean you have to accommodate how do you do that, right? It's important nonetheless. So that would be my response. It's layered, but it comes down to recognizing and potentially empowering the other through your policies, your programs, and your initiatives.
I have sort of two answers. One is, this is also why I teach a course called Theories of Collective Liberation, and why a part of my scholarship is focused on collective liberation. I don't know how many people in here are fans of Bell Hooks. If you haven't read her stuff, I mean, read all of it. She was a genius. So she had this paragraph where she says, until we are all able to accept the interlocking, interdependent nature of systems of domination and recognize specific ways each system is maintained, we will continue to act in ways that undermine our individual quest for freedom and collective liberation struggle. And so I think there's a question as to, CRT proper, like its role globally, but then also I think CRT as being part of an umbrella of theories that ask us, how do we address domination and subordination globally? And so I think, there are aspects of CRT, which if you're particularly interested, LatCrit, so like Latin critical race theory brings in a lot more of like a global focus to say, okay, we're really concerned about race, but what does that mean? Like, what is this brown thing? Like, we're discriminating against people based on language, based on geography. In a post 9/11 world, there's, of course, like Asian Pacific American crit. Because remember, race is not just black and white. So like CRT is about race and inclusive of, white and non-white. And so like you get a lot of perspectives and like a lot more of an international perspective from like a Lat crit, APA crit, tribal crit perspective to like help us sort of think about what can domination look like. What does it mean to be racialized? Like, what does it mean to be subjugated in these various ways? But then, I think just, again, sort of CRT is, again, another tool to help us to think about just dominance and subordination more generally as we look at the world.
Yes. We'll have Al Mans. And while he's getting the microphone, I'd be remiss if we didn't acknowledge the work that Al Mans has done. He's part of the legal redress team as well. So take your time, okay? Do what you need to do.
I just wanted to comment on this international matter that's been raised. Senator Cruz characterized CRT as being Marxist. Now, if they want to understand anything about research, they know that Marx used a particular kind of research technique in which he investigated the problems that he saw in his society in England and in Russia and so forth. So, and what you, Dr. Butler, have just referenced is a kind of research method in which you go about looking at data. And there are many areas of critical theory that's beyond race. There are other areas, feminist criminal theory, feminist criminal theory is another example. So they're all different kinds of classes. But Marx came up with a particular way of doing something. And so what Senator Cruz does is to mischaracterize or give you the impression that critical race theory is somehow a method of research or activity which is politically motivated by the thought of Marxist theology. It's not. It's just a method like any other social scientist trying to study, getting data to understand a phenomenon in the system.
For sure.
Thank you. Thank you. We have a question up here by Guy, who's also a member of the legal redress team and who organized this event.
My son is a public defender in California, and I was talking with him about this program. And he said, "Okay, Dad, in 3 sentences, describe critical race theory." And I said, I went to segregated all-white schools when I was a boy. I remember Brown versus Board of Education. I remember my school integrating. And the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. I believed when I was a young man that by the time I was an old man, these things would solve the problem. And I'm now an old man and they didn't. We've still got very much the same problems. Critical race theory, and Brown versus Board is the theory based on the racial theory that color blindness will solve the problems. Critical race theory, I said, criticizes the insufficiency of color blindness and says we need to go beyond that if we're going to really address the deeper problems of race in our culture. That might have been more than 3 sentences, but the question I've got is, how close am I to having a useful understanding of critical race theory with that approach?
That was good. Thumbs up.
Yeah, thumbs up.
Thumbs up. You got it.
Sounds good to me.
I think alluding to any other questions at the moment. Oh, we have one up at the top. Oh, you have, sorry. Please ask your question, and then we'll come up to you.
So I'm also a law student. Can you hear me now? Okay. So my name is Samantha Jean. I'm also a second-year law student. I have the pleasure of taking Professor Butler's course. I sit here with such admiration looking at you all, but I do have a personal question for you guys, which is, what do you do about sort of the inherent that there's an exhaustion that I feel being a law student with the work that comes along with CRT. There's a personal burden. You have your studies, you have everything that you need to do, but there's an exhaustion that comes with the performance that is empathy oftentimes. And so while you're doing the work, while you're existing in your skin, while you're trying to sort of sift out who's with you, who's not, right? Where do you find solace? Where do you take a break? What does mental health look like for you during doing this work? Because personally, I'm at a breaking point. I'm from New York City, and this is my first time in a small town, and I get told every day how Bloomington is such a liberal bubble, but it is barely tolerant to me. And so existing in this space, in my skin, while also trying to be conscious and preserve my mental health. There is an inexplicable burden that sometimes makes you want to run for the hills and hide. What does it look like to preserve your sanity? What does it look like to love on the people that love on you and still maintain your survival?
That's a good question. I want to answer it too, but I'm going to give it to the panelists first.
That's a good question, and someone brought that up to me yesterday at a panel. And I asked this young man to explain more like what he meant by, he thought Bloomington was challenging for blacks, especially young blacks. He said the word is out basically for blacks not to even come to Bloomington. He found the times that he came here, limited black-owned businesses. That was troublesome. And then the drive through Martinsville. Okay, don't go, you gotta go through Martinsville to get to Bloomington, and Bloomington is just not all that great and welcoming. Social activities, the lack thereof for the black youth. And so the word I got from this guy, who's an artist in Indianapolis, forget about going to Bloomington. And so for me personally, I've developed friendships and someone to talk to, especially during the difficult years that I was here. Now that I'm a grandmother, nothing beats that. Just time with the grandkids. But I do understand the exhaustion of dealing with racism on a day-to-day basis. And I always wondered if the youth felt like I did. I've been in places not too long ago here in Bloomington that I knew I wasn't welcome. I could feel it. And I've always wondered if the youth, having grown up in integration, if you recognize that with us older blacks recognized when we go into places. But just having good friends, doesn't matter what color they are, that's not the point. Friendships is friendships, that you could sit down and talk to them and be with them and then go on vacation. Go somewhere. That helps too, for me, personally.
The executive coach in me wants to ask you this. How would you know when you've reached that equilibrium? How would you describe it? How will you know when you're in a good space where you feel?
Yeah, I guess that's a good question. I felt like maybe I was there in other environments, right? There were issues, but they didn't look like this. I think that this is the chapter in my life where it's so heavy, and I feel like I'm in a time bubble that has socially regressed, and I am sort of, yeah.
Right. And so the question I would pose to you is, how would it feel when you're not at that limit? What's your optimum feeling or level like, right? And then using that answer. So for instance, I know I'm at an optimal level when I can breathe without having that tightness in my chest, when I don't feel like snapping on the person who's in front of me, right? And then using those answers to inform, okay, how do I get there? Yeah. Because to Liz's point, it might be friends, or it could be going up to Indianapolis, or it could be something as simple as cooking my own meal without the TV on, but it all starts from answering the question, how will you know that you're there? What words would you use to describe it? How does it manifest itself physically? And then using those answers to inform, how do I create that feeling, right? Does that resonate?
Yeah, it does. I think that my community at the law school, through the Black Law Students Association and through certain professors and through certain friends. I think that that is the only reason why, we're still on this legal journey. That, and also because, I have no choice but to carry on sort of the legacy of myself and my family.
And this might help you, is form a family. I didn't have family here when I came. So there were people, if you know Dr. Mumford, he became my Bloomington dad. Mrs. Rose Durson became my Bloomington mom. So you create your own family. And that's always good, because sometimes that's better than the real thing. And I tell some of the youth here that I met, you can come to my house. I'm your mama while you're here. So, we got you.
Okay.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is, like, law school, school generally, grad schools definitely, professional schools absolutely train you to be a workhorse, and you're supposed to grind and not complain about it. But give yourself the permission to reprioritize. Like, this is your life. You're the one who has to live it. Mm-hmm. And it's okay to prioritize. It's okay to say, I can't get to all of this. I have to, I'm absolutely, pursue any and all leadership positions. But also, sometimes when you're good at doing stuff, people keep asking you to do stuff. And it's okay to say no, work on saying no. No is a full sentence. And one of my friends, who's also a lawyer but has managed this way better than me. We were talking the other day, and she's like, I just want to feel happy every day. And it hit me. I was like, I have been numb for years. I hadn't decided, I'm gonna prioritize happiness. What does joy look like to me? And I've had to rediscover what joy looks like. And so definitely, I think the question of what would that optimum feeling feel like, and then what do you have to map out? What would it take to do that? What responsibilities might have to fall by the wayside? Mm-hmm. It is okay to rest and eat well and sleep, and you can't help anybody or do any good if you are burned out.
I like to look at the larger perspective too, because what I hear you say is this idea of you doing the work, right? And so, which is important, but I'd be curious of how can it be done on a larger scale, because it feels like it's all on you. Well, you need to just get better then. If you breaking, then you just need to get better. And I think that we should talk as a community. That's why these discussions should continue to take place, because harm is still being done. So if harm is still being done, then that means we still have work to be done to do, right? So our community I would encourage our community to continue to do the work, not just because of what you share with us, which we're grateful for, but our community must understand that we're not a utopia. And we do still have a lot of work to be done. And that's on us to do that work so that our students, when they come, or individuals when they come, they feel that welcoming, that sense of community. Instead of course, you can go to Indianapolis or different places, because I know I personally do. I go to Fort Wayne often because I love my family dearly. But how do we as a community cultivate this sense of belonging? And I think that's on us in the community, because we can ask the tough questions, we can go back and forth with discussions, we can be a part of NAACP, we can do all this stuff, but if we continue to have experiences like this student, then we're doing a disservice, right? So we as a community collectively, understanding that the work doesn't have to just be on you. So we share that with you. And I think that it's on us to definitely continue to cultivate this sense of belonging. Yeah. Do you have a question?
I feel like that's such a good ending. I don't want to ask you a question.
Please ask. We want to hear you. Please.
Hi, I'm Anastasia. I'm also a second-year law student at Maurer. And as an Asian student with Asian friends back home and Asian family back home on the East Coast who are why did you go to Indiana? Like, why are you entering the arena like that? And I basically had to tell them, like, no, we're in the arena. You're also in the arena. This is a fight for all of us. And I think then, so when it comes to critical race theory and like the model minority myth, I kind of have to tell them, like, are you really comfortable with being phrased as white when it's convenient? Or do you want to recognize that we're also the historical other, as you guys mentioned earlier? So I was just wondering, like, what, is there like a more educated answer to that question than the one that I've had to come up with for my friends and family? Like, no, we're all in this fight. Like, what are you even saying? So.
Solid answer. And no notes.
Thumbs up.
Sorry, I didn't mean. It was a question, not a comment. It truly was a question.
Well, no, like I think you're right on. If you want any resources, there are things I love assigning. Like, for example, and of course I immediately blank. You guys read this, but yes, I will. Feel free to reach out, and I have readings. But yeah, because remember, I said a lot of CRT includes like APA crit, which has a lot to say about like the Asian American experience and model minority myth and nativism, and of course there's a lot of nativism right now, and like is a recurring pattern. And so yeah, I think also just like in the vein of collective liberation, and we're all in this together, and it's like. Every minority group has analogous experiences with oppression in this nation and globally. And like it's important to recognize the ways in which all of these forms of subjugation are obviously unique in the ways that they happen, but very similar in what they're trying to accomplish.
The related question is, how do you tell them that they're still being oppressed? Like, they feel that they aren't anymore. So, like, is it just a problem of framing what oppression actually is?
And when you say API crit, just for the
yeah,
people,
sorry.
and then crit is critical race theory for those that were wondering. I saw you. I got you.
I think the key is, do you believe, or do people believe that there's something better? Because I think what frequently happens, and I'm guilty of it too in the past, it's accepting, in other words, it's trying to change whether they're institutional, whether they're governmental, whether they are economical systems and policies, right, those that already exist so that we can fit in, versus thinking and seeing the world differently and aspiring for that, right? Because it all comes down to how you see or perceive or want to perceive the world, right? So I'll give you an example. Imagine that it's 7:30 in the morning, your stomach is rumbling. What would we call that? Probably call it hunger, right? So what would you do? It generates a response. You go to the refrigerator, you go into your car or DoorDash, whatever it is, you feed yourself. Same feeling, stomach rumbling, you're in the sky. Planes going up and down, turbulence, right? And so what do? You probably call that anxiety. So you may grasp the seat rest, or you may not get up. You might just tighten your seatbelt. 10 o'clock at night, stomach rumbling. What would you call that? It might be indigestion, right? And so you take an acid, right? The whole point is how you conceive or define makes a huge difference in the response. So again, how do you do it when it comes to your family and friends? I would say, what can the world be? Have you ever thought about what it can be? And then challenging them to think about how will we go about doing that? Well, we can't change the existing systems. I'm not saying that. Maybe it's not about changing the existing systems. Maybe it's about making some changes here and there, mending, right? But focusing on changing the focus is my point.
Thank you so much.
I have to say,
Yes.
as one of the oldest people in the room. So I wish I could tell you, young sister, I wish I could tell you that New York is better, because I lived in New York and it wasn't. I wish I could tell you that Florida is better. It's warmer, but it's not better, okay? I wish I could tell you that Texas is better, okay? But if you wish to be a change agent, no matter where you go in the world, there's work to be done, and there's a place for you. And so, in the play Joe Turner's Come and Gone, there's a line between two characters. And one says to the other, man, it is so difficult to find your place in the world. And the other one says, you just have to start where you find yourself. You start where you find yourself. And that's what we do every day. We just keep starting over and over again, an inch a little bit, but you start over again. I don't have the option at 77, almost 78, to be tired. That's not an option. It's not an option. Not if we want to make the world a better place. Gandhi said, we must be the change we wish to see in the world.
Dr. Nelms. Yes, please do what we need to do. We got 2 more questions up at the top.
Hi, I'm Keith. I'm one of the oldest person here. I'm 76, so and of course I'm white, and I've been dealing all my life with educating myself, and more recently, even more, an implicit bias and everything. My main question is, how do you answer? And I struggle with this when I hear a politician say, you don't, if it makes you uncomfortable, we should not have that course. It's like, okay, do you say kindergarten through 8th grade shouldn't get this? Or how do educators answer that? Because, when I went to school, I didn't have to deal with that. But I realized by the absence of a lot of history and information, I did not know enough about slavery, about the white man, what we did in history. I thank God for people's history of the U.S. and a lot of other resources in that. But anyhow, by the way, I moved here 4 years ago to Bloomington from Florida, from Sarasota, Florida, right close to New School. New School is the school that DeSantis completely changed to conservative, and kids are leaving or students are leaving who are liberal, and whatever word you want to use. But it was an institution that was very respected. Okay, I'm just providing a framework because what I'm hearing is, we white people need to educate each other. I heard strongly, when I went to New School, I went to a panel just like this. Black students informed me and others, look, I'm tired. I'm writing a paper here, but I've spent half my time at the school telling whites what to say and do and think, and I'm tired. I'm tired of it. The guy that said this, was on the panels, Miles Eiton. He did a film, and it was a review and a critical review. This was sort of the background of what was going on. But he had a film out called Sincerely the Black Kids. It's on YouTube. And he was so impressed with him because he had this panel together to educate me as a white man and others that we need to educate each other and not go to blacks and ask, or people of color, what do we do? So what do? I become uncomfortable because I've been reading a lot of books. I'm free, retired, but I gotta be uncomfortable. I give up some sports. Oh, that's hard. I give up my news and weather. And then I start meeting with other people who are white. And I go to church, by the way, it's awesome. First United Church, the Jessica Peterson, Matai Peterson is. I thank her for really reaching out to us whites to try to understand. She's married to a Kenyan, and I'm really thankful for that. But anyhow, enough of that. The question is, how do you deal, and I struggle with this, how do you answer a politician that says, it's going to make you uncomfortable? It's like, you can't teach it because it'll make you uncomfortable. What? That's the main, how do you answer that? So,
We have another hand. Right, yes.
Right there.
Yep.
Over there.
Yes, yep. Thank you.
Did we want to allow the panelists an opportunity to answer that while I travel over here? Thank you.
I'll say a little something to that. I think to reach your comfortable spot, and for all of us, you may go through some uncomfortable things. And why can't we talk about uncomfortable issues? Whether it's in your family, personal issues, or in our nation, we've all done some things that have not been quite right. That's just being part of human. And so can you talk about that? Can I even go back in my life and go, there's times I didn't do right. And it's uncomfortable to admit that you've done some wrong things. But to get to that comfortable point, you go through those uncomfortable things. It won't last that long, but we've got to a point now, we don't want to be uncomfortable. We just want to lay on the sofa and watch TV and have our ice cream and just be comfortable and not worry about anything that's going to make us feel bad. But as a nation, we have to get to that point where we could at least talk about it. Because like I mentioned earlier, someone else said, I'm tired of this. I'm tired of it. How much longer do I have to go? And how much longer do you want to put up with it? That's a good question to ask. Another question.
Okay, my name is Nate Johnson. I'm with Racial Justice Task Force at Trinity Episcopal Church and Bloomington Multi-Faith Alliance. So let's see, what we have done is to research racist housing segregation in Bloomington and create an online interactive map of all of the properties that were once whites only in Bloomington via the instrument of racially restrictive housing covenant. There were approximately 1,000 of them. They were all over town, but especially encircling the campus. We're interested in doing this because we want to see a future of housing justice and racial justice. This is our end goal that we have in mind. The map is not justice, but it's just a tool that shows us what injustice looks like. All of these racist policies are now illegal. They've been illegal, in fact, since before I was even born. But we live in Bloomington today where property ownership is not distributed equitably. So with the future goal in mind of more equitable distribution of property ownership, we're looking for ideas of what to do next. You know, we have a map, the map doesn't do anything. So I would just like to ask you if you could please respond to that, and if you have any ideas for us, questions we might be asking or actions that we might put our effort into. Thank you so much.
Any responses here? Thank you, Nate.
I mean, that's a great project. So thanks for pulling the data together. I'm happy to be in conversation after this about that because I have a variety of ideas, one of which being I've always kind of fantasized about having a CRT class that was very specifically focused on the area in which, in the geographical area in which I am teaching, to demonstrate exactly how that legacy continues to perpetuate a variety of inequities. And so anyway, I think there's a lot of potential for a lot of great uses for that information. And so I'm happy to talk later about it if you are interested. I don't know if you guys have anything right off.
I would ask you to pose the following question. What variables or conditions must be satisfied in order for your thesis to come true? Right? So for instance, there has to be access to capital. There has to be knowledge of the market. There has to be all these different things, right? And so that will help you to, or help the group, the organization to delineate and kind of separate the areas that contribute to this ultimate goal. And then based on that analysis, you can determine where do you want to invest your human and financial resources, and which of those areas. Maybe it's just one, or maybe it's 5, but really think about what are the conditions, what are the variables that must be satisfied in order for your thesis to be realized.
Thank you so much. Nashuba, did you want to ask yours? And then we could start to wrap up.
Yes, of course I did. I know a lot of us have been floating around the question what it is that we can do now. A segment of the law student body is actually getting together to try to combat a controversial speaker that is coming to the law school. His name is by the name of Ilya Shapiro. I highly eager, if you don't know who that is, please go look him up. a segment of the law student population is very, very upset about this, and we're trying to come together to kind of collaborate to see what it is, how we as a student body can respond to that, as well as citizens as well. If you're interested in seeing how you could help us or be of some support in a way, even if it is showing up to the event that we would want to do, that includes maybe even doing a demonstration, or if you see us and people are asking, what is that? You would know. But we are really asking for some support from our community. We've been in conversations with administration, and as future attorneys, we understand the legal right to free speech, but we have our legal right to free speech and assemble as well. So if you are interested in helping our student body, I do highly ask that after this program, you please come see us, because we're all in the room, as you see. Thank you.
Guy, and then we're going to ask our panel to do last minute remarks, and then I'll come back up to close us out.
Perfect. I want to make one homework assignment for you to consider, and some of you law students have probably done this. But the other day, I finally got around to reading the Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson is the Associate Supreme Court Justice, and her dissent in the North Carolina affirmative action case is the best legal opinion I have ever read in my life. I've read a lot of them. It's as those things go, pretty short, and it's incredibly accessible and non-technical. And I've thought about affirmative action a lot, and when I read it, I said, oh, she just lays it all out and makes it so that you will understand why affirmative action makes sense. And to me, that goes back with critical race theory. Why isn't colorblind enough? And she lays out the best answer I've ever imagined. I'm not going to give you a cite, because if you look Justice Jackson affirmative action dissent, it'll pop up right up on any search engine. So I really recommend, everybody here I know is interested in these questions, and that is a brilliant analysis.
Thank you. All right, panelists, this is the daunting moment where we have to pause this amazing community discussion. Go ahead and give yourselves a round of applause for contributing, for being here the whole entire time. We really appreciate it. So go ahead and do your remarks, please, and then I'll close this up.
Yeah. So I think one of the questions that often comes up time and time again is why? Like, why is critical race theory so contentious, particularly given, the whole conversation that we've had? And to me, I think that often boils down to what is the story of our nation, and like, what is the story that we want to pass on? And also, like, what are the values that we hold dear? And so if the version of the story is we live in a meritocracy, everything you do as an individual is up to you as an individual, your successes and your failures are up to you as an individual, that inherently conflicts with ideas like systemic racism that say that, like, there are these barriers, there are historical reasons, there are societal reasons why, like, there are hierarchies and why it's hard for some people to succeed in the ways that others do. And so I think as you're trying to understand, like, why is there such pushback, I think, consider the narrative that you've been taught about America, some of the edits that you might make or have made throughout your life. And I think those edits can feel really threatening. I think going back to something that you said earlier about, oh, well, they're worried that, we're gonna lose all this power. I think that that's part of it. And so definitely meeting people where they are to have these conversations is really important, keeping in mind that it can feel threatening because you're questioning certain values and the narrative of what the U.S. is. Yeah, so that's what I'll leave you guys with.
That's a good, I would love to steal that and use that as my own.
Please do.
Thank you. That's what I'm going to do. No. There are many things I would say, but what I would leave you with is this, is that CRT is a theory. It's not an instrument, it's not a tool, but it's a way of seeing the world. It's a way of seeing our government, our different financial, political institutions. And so the challenge then is, with that knowledge, how do you wish to proceed? How do you wish to proceed, right? And there are a number of ways you can do that. For instance, once a day, it might be asking the question, why? Just why aren't there XYZ people here? Or what could be the cause of the lack of resources? Asking the question, why, right? The second thing I would say is being intentional and deliberate, right? You've got to be intentional and deliberate. It can't just be a one-off. But it's almost like if you're losing weight, you're trying to lose weight, you have to dedicate yourself to minimizing the amount of calories, right? And every day you do it, right? Otherwise, you're not going to lose the weight. So the same thing is true as we think about CRT, and perhaps more importantly, creating a more equitable and just society. And then the last piece is, or the third piece is to be courageous. This is not easy, to your point. It's not, right? And there are a lot of people who will say the right things, but then at the end of the day won't take action. But hopefully, all of us in this room, in this auditorium, will have the courage to not just say the right thing, but to do the right thing, despite the discomfort, despite the pushback, and despite even the potential isolation. So that's what I will leave you with.
Okay. My final thoughts are to get out of your comfort zone. Try that. And walk up to somebody when Maquiva said when we got here, talk to somebody you don't know. We always go and sit with someone we know that's comfortable. So speak to somebody you don't know. Strike up a conversation. And if you can, do one kind act a day. And it may be at Aldi's, rather than taking that quarter back from your basket. Give that basket to somebody. A quarter's not gonna kill you. Just something like that. Every day, so, think of what kind act you're gonna do. But this having a conversation and getting to know someone that you normally wouldn't talk to.
Well, let's give our panelists a round of applause, please. Let's do a little bit louder than that. Yes, yes, yes. Yes, thank you. That'd be great. I'd like for our NAACP members to just wave or be recognized. That'd be great. Thank you so much for your membership. I know that we have some individuals that are on our city council, legislation, all the things. We appreciate you all being here, and I hope that you all took some notes as well. So thank you so much. And just being mindful of that question of why. And then I just want to say, of course, we need to give a huge round of applause to Guy Loftman for organizing this in the first place. We appreciate your work that you do and your dedication. And then I want to say thank you to our sponsors. I'm going to read them off. That's why my computer actually just died. So that's why I was like, give me your paper. So Alpha Kappa Alpha, Sorority Inc., Kappa Tau Omega Chapter, the Brown County League of Women Voters, Indiana University Civic Leader Center, Indiana University NAACP, Indiana University Neil Marshall Black Culture Center, Jeffersonville Clark NAACP, Martin Luther King Jr. Commission of the City of Bloomington, Monroe County Democratic Party, Monroe County Democratic Women's Caucus, the League of Women Voters of Bloomington, Monroe County, Monroe County National Organization for Women, St. Mark's United Methodist Church, St. Thomas Lutheran Church, Trinity Episcopal Church, Racial Justice Task Force of the Unitarian Universalist Church, IU Kelley School of Business, Cody Office, Chamber of Commerce, and Limestone Media for advertising, And as you can see, this list just demonstrates, it only just demonstrates that more people want to have these types of conversations. And I hope that we are aware that our community want to continue to have these conversations, and that we refuse to gatekeep information, but that we continue to persuade and continue to demystify and challenge the system of Bloomington and challenge these different systems in a way that is discussion-based, that is also implementary. I want to leave you with this quote from Brian Stevenson, who I look up to. I look up to a lot of people, but Brian Stevenson he's an executive director for the Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery, Alabama. This is what he says: proximity is recognizing the power you have to make a difference in the lives of the people around you, and at the very least, wrapping your arms around them and affirming them in their humanity and in their dignity. And so I hope that we understand that proximity of having these conversations such as CRT and systemic oppression can actually change one step at a time, one life at a time, and that's important no matter how big or how small. So thank you all so much. Please save the date for our Freedom Fund, which is April 6th. And if you have any questions as it relates to NAACP, please feel free to let us know. But I hope that you take some time to get to know our panelists as well. So thank you so much. You are dismissed.